Welcome back to another suggestion review, and today, we're taking a look at 3 total suggestions that are all small additions to the game, 2 of them being move variants, and the third being 2 potential Binding Vows for duo ranked. I'm going to review all these suggestions sent to me and explain why they work or why they fail. But before that, make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on Jujutsu Shenanigans, and leave your suggestion in the comments or send them to me on Discord for a chance to get your suggestion reviewed in a video. Now, let's take a look at all of these ideas. The first is from Mori J, who's suggesting a variant on Hakari's rough energy. The way it works is relatively simple. Hakari summons his doors, jumps off of them, and then slams down onto the ground, ragdolling the opponent. If I'm going to be fully honest here, this move variant sounds a lot like the copy of Crushing Blow or Stockpile's aerial variants. However, I will say that the move would help Hakari out quite a bit. Hakari's main limitation has nothing to do with damage, combos, or anything stat related, because all of those are great, and he's pretty decent at close quarters combat overall. However, he has zero mobility tools at all, and has nothing but the universal mechanics to gap close on an opponent, meaning that the opponent either has to get up close in Hakari's face themselves for Hakari to get his strengths, or Hakari is forced to close a gap with pretty much nothing to work with. Giving him a variant like this would make it easier for him to do that, though I could definitely also see it being a great combo starter, and you might be wondering why I say that, because this is a ragdoll. The thing is, Hakari can capitalize really well off of ragdolls by dashing backwards, using reserve balls of shutter doors, and then forward dashing. And while that probably won't do that much damage as his normal combo, it's still decent damage I could get off of this move. As a whole, I could see this working well with Hakari by giving him an additional move that works in neutral, with the only nitpick I really have being that it's just so similar to Crushing Blow and Stockpile's aerial variants. Generally a good suggestion, at least from my initial overview. The next suggestion comes from Sarraft, who's made a lot of great looking suggestions with their development skills. And this suggestion is a Barrierless Malevolent Shrine variant. Now, to be fully honest, despite how great the showcase of the suggestion looks, I do have some problems with how it actually works that I'm going to explain. First problem with it is the global cooldown. On the one hand, I understand why they added that in. If this is an insanely powerful move that covers the whole map, they don't want people spamming it over and over again. But global cooldowns are kind of stupid here, especially a 3-minute one. The reason I say that is because if one person does this move, then you awaken as Sukuna and decide you want to do it too, you can't. You're locked out of using your full moveset and having fun with it, because someone else did something before you could. And so if you want to do this, you either have to wait 3 minutes before using your awakening to pull off the funny thing, or you just have to suck it up and awaken, knowing that you don't get the Barrierless domain. You do all this hard work to finally use that Barrierless domain, but now you can't because someone else used it. Global cooldowns are fine in some games where there aren't such limits, like YBA, where a global time stop cooldown can be justified, since you could actually theoretically just spam time stops back to back, and they're a free stun, which is really unfun to sit through. But here that problem isn't a thing. Hence why a global cooldown isn't really that necessary, because it's limited to awakenings, which aren't that common, and the conditional, which you need to achieve. Speaking of the conditional, let's go over it. First, you need to land a dismantle, cleave, and open, and you also need to be above 40 to 50% of your health. Besides the health conditional, all of this is relatively easy, even if it isn't completely free. Both dismantle and cleave are hilariously easy to string together in a combo, and while open is a little bit hard to land in a 1v1 in ranked, it's no problem to land it in a public server by just nuking a crowd or something. You can realistically achieve this in the time you have in your awakening, though you still have to work for it, and if you miss open, your chance goes down a lot since the cooldown is long, so I'm fine with this as a conditional. As for the 40 to 50% HP conditional, this is definitely a huge limitation that I can honestly see getting negated without much issue. One Gojo Lapse Blue Maximum, and maybe a few M1s for extra measure, is enough to take Sukuna into the red. Hell, if he gets caught by pretty much any character without a ragdoll cancel, he'll be brought down to that health amount since Sukuna only has 85 HP, hence taking a lot more damage than other characters. I'm not necessarily against this, since something this good probably shouldn't be very easy to use, but it is something to keep in mind since you also need to maintain at 40 to 50% HP to keep the domain going. That would also make it very hard to use against other awakenings, considering just how much damage all of them are capable of outputting. I do think the HP threshold should be reduced a little bit, because it's way too easy for any character to take a Sukuna below 50% of their HP if they're able to land any hits, which, considering the second part of the suggestion, and how Sukuna is left open for quite a few hits at the start, seems like it wouldn't be that hard to accomplish. What I will say though, is that the damage scaling of the domain makes it incredibly risky to go up close and try to get the user below that threshold, so to some extent, it is also sort of balanced out by that. Speaking of damage scaling, let's get to the actual effects of what the domain does. If you meet the conditions, you do another button combo kind of like World Cutting Slash, starting a wind-up animation of you opening your domain expansion. The screen will be painted in black and red. It covers the distance from the towers to the restaurant, so roughly a ninth or an eighth of the map. You'll be incapable of moving at the start of the domain for 7 seconds, and anybody inside takes a toned-down version of the damage from the original domain expansion that scales on proximity. If someone is right next to it, they take the damage of Plasma Wave, so essentially just straight up die, while anyone at the very end takes damage comparable to M1 damage, which is still a lot, but definitely not too pressing if you're not eating the entire domain and are actually holding block. Everyone caught in the domain is trapped during it, as well as getting a slowness debuff and skill speed debuff of 0.6, which makes it harder to get out of the death zone, and as a little bonus extra tidbit, Mahoraga can adapt to it if they're 10 to 15 studs close, which will make them completely immune to it. Finally, if the user runs out of ultimate, then the shrine disappears faster, but it doesn't immediately get destroyed. Generally, I like these effects. I do however feel that the slow might be a bit much, since Sukuna also gets an invisible barrier on his domain. And speaking of the invisible barrier, before someone out there goes and says, if it's a barrierless domain, it shouldn't have a barrier, here's the thing. If that was the case, this would be very weak unless the range was extremely high, because then you could walk out of it for free instead of bothering to interrupt it or anything. And if the range was extremely high to counteract that, then the move is just ridiculously annoying and overpowered because you could be in a random corner of the map and get nailed by a Sukuna domain. The barrier is so important for Sukuna's domain to keep people from negating the entire thing, so I don't care if it's not truly barrierless, because a truly barrierless domain makes balance weird, which is probably why Z opted to go for a barriered Sukuna domain in the first place. As a whole, I think the suggestion is okay. It's hard to balance something like this if I'm being fully honest, but it does at least sound fun for the user. It definitely doesn't sound fun to get nailed by this domain out of nowhere, though that's kind of the nature of things. It should be made closer to Hollow Purple Nuke where it ends your awakening after use, so that there's a massive opportunity cost for something like this, but other than that, I think it's pretty cool. To finish off this video, we're going to take a look at this duo Binding Vows suggestion, which is sort of unique, but also has a ton of problems. To summarize, the author wants to add character-specific Binding Vows into casual ranked 2v2s, with 2 ideas for them. Already, off the bat, unless Z drastically changes ranked matchmaking, this is impossible to add to the game, and here's why. The way matchmaking in 2v2s works is that 4 people step on a platform, and those 4 people are randomly put on 2 teams. You also can't switch characters inside of ranked before the match to plan things out either, and so you can't realistically plan out a way to get these Binding Vows, since Z's matchmaking doesn't allow for planned out teams. Unless that gets changed, this suggestion can't be added. Besides that though, I have some criticisms for the Binding Vows themselves. The first one basically makes one player a spectator for the first half of the match, with one person having to basically solo for the first half, and then in the second half of the match, the second person gets to take over with Permanent Awakening. The idea just sounds incredibly unfun for a lot of reasons. Not only does one person not get to play the game for over 3 minutes, but the other person has to either fight a 2v1, in which case they'll likely die and just automatically lose the match, or they can instead spend the entire match running with wall jumps till their friend can take over with Infinite Awakening. The problem gets pretty obvious from there. No matter how you spin it, this Binding Vow ends up being ridiculously unfun. You either spend the whole match getting murdered if you're the player, or watching your friend get murdered if you're the Sukuna substitute, or you get to spend the entire match running away for 3 minutes instead of fighting, which isn't fun for anybody. Also, no specifications for what happens if the Yuji manages to awaken before the swap happens, so another problem there. The other Binding Vow is fine, I guess, 2.5 times damage boost, except your health bars are shared, which is kind of like a 2 times damage taken multiplier if you're Yuji and Choso. Except Yuji has 85 HP and Choso has 100, so I'm also not sure how that's gonna work either. So you one-shot everybody, but if both of you get comboed, you also get one shot. Honestly seems really unfun for everybody at that point because it's just one-shot combo simulator, and there's no room for a good fight there. The suggestion as a whole is sort of bad, even though the idea is kind of unique. 2v2 matchmaking doesn't allow for this kind of thing, and even if it did, these ideas for Binding Vows just aren't very fun. With that, those are all the suggestions I'm going to go over. I really like the Hakari one, both for the graphics and because it could actually work in the game, despite how simplistic it is. And the Sukuna Barrierless domain is interesting, though I don't think it could get added without being very annoying. The Binding Vows, though, to be honest, were not a suggestion I really liked. Anyways, we're at the end of the video now. If you enjoyed watching, then make sure to subscribe for even more JJS content. I'm New Eternally, hope you have a good day, and I'll see you next time in another video. Bye.